I had people internally at Google who were like, why do we buy you? Why are we doing spreadsheets? And I remember the first time when we launched it internally, people were just playing tic-tac-toe on it. Marissa Mayer went to Yahoo and became their CEO. She basically demanded that Google Docs, they need to use Google Docs, a few years after we launched. And that's when I knew, okay, we have something.
Welcome to the New Build Podcast. I'm Abhinav Narayan, video producer at Bubble. And today, Bubble co-founder and co-host of this podcast, Emmanuel Straschnov, is sitting down with an incredibly special guest. Farzad Khosrowshahi, who goes by Fuzzy, has been described by his co-founders as a genius, self-taught engineer. After starting in life insurance and opening a Subway sandwich franchise, Fuzzy has gone on to have a decades-long career as an active leader for 3 of the defining productivity platforms in the modern era. In the early 2000s, he invented a tool for web-based spreadsheets that was eventually acquired and reintroduced to the world as Google Sheets. After 15 years at Google, Fuzzy joined Slack as SVP of Product Engineering in early 2020, right when remote work was exploding thanks to the global COVID pandemic. In late 2023, Fuzzy joined Notion as their CTO. When making the announcement, Notion CEO Ivan Zhao had this to say: "Few tools have touched millions and billions of people in such meaningful ways. Fuzzy co-founded the first one and scaled the latter too." On today's episode, he and Emmanuel will discuss that incredible trajectory, as well as his honest thoughts on why these tools were so successful, what they could have done differently, and the rise of AI and vibe coding. Couldn't be more excited to have him on the show. Stay tuned after for some Bubble updates, including a bonus product announcement and a new developer tip of the week. But for now, I'll pass the mic to Emmanuel for his interview with Fuzzy.
Hi, Fuzzy. Very excited to have you here.
Excited to be here, Emmanuel.
Yeah, many people don't know that, but you are our very first individual investor. So it's pretty meaningful to me to get you on this podcast. So first of all, thank you very much for taking the time. And excited to chat. I think people who listen to this podcast tend to start companies. That's the people that Bubble serve the best. And you have a lot of interesting things to say. I know we had a few conversations in the past, and so excited to get that on the record today.
I'm excited to be here.
Maybe let's start with your past, actually. Before you got into technology and ended up creating what became Google Sheets, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but you were running a Subway franchise and selling life insurance, which is not necessarily the most usual background for a founder. So I guess what pulled you into technology, and what from these early jobs still shape how you think about building products or building companies today?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every time I get asked this question, I think about it and I'm like, it all feels sort of like a dream. But you got to remember that, first of all, I'm a lot older than probably everyone that's going to be listening to this podcast. So when I graduated from college in 1989, I immediately got married to my college sweetheart. And at that time, the cloud wasn't what it is today. There was no mobile. The dot-com boom hadn't happened. You didn't have VCs going around lending money. And certainly if I had tried, I don't think I would have been able to raise any money. So the type of businesses that people were starting, and I always thought about starting my own business, it wasn't like, oh, naturally, it's got to be in tech. In high school, I was using a typewriter. It's only in college that I got familiar with computers and started using computers. So when I graduated, I landed on getting a job selling life insurance for 3 months, sold real estate for 3 months. Eventually, 2 years later, when my wife graduated and we got married, we were sort of young and naive, and we thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if we worked together all day and all night and had a business together? And we settled on, why don't we start our Subway sandwich shop? And that sort of got the thought going in our mind of, hey, this will be easy. We can do it. And Subway, went to Subway University. I actually worked at a deli for 2 weeks just to try it out and see that I was going to be okay. And we opened up a Subway sandwich shop. And within, I think this was early 90s. And within a month, I was like, oh my God, what did we do? We were there for 9 months and we ended up selling it at a loss. My wife says it's probably one of the worst experiences she's had. We're still married, obviously, so it wasn't that bad. For me, it was actually one of the best experiences I could have had. It centered me. It made me more humble. Every time I walk into a service-oriented business, I have a lot of empathy, and it makes my job every day talking to you and, being in tech and at Google or Slack or at Notion, like Disney World. It's not even comparable to standing on your feet, opening up a sandwich shop in the, early morning and going till late at night, basically working on your feet. It's not comparable. And I think many people in tech don't have that appreciation because they come straight from college into tech and they never work in a service oriented business. So they don't get to experience that and realize how hard it is. I feel like we're all so lucky, the folks that are in tech. So
Right.
from that standpoint, it really helped center me and shape me as a person and as a manager. I'm a lot more empathetic and understanding, but it also was a spearhead for me becoming an expert in Excel because Subway wanted to charge us like $2,000 to adopt their ledger system. Excel had just launched, and $2,000 for me at the time was a lot of money. So I basically replicated the ledger system for Subway using Excel and Excel macros. And that's what led me to really fall in love with Excel and spreadsheets in general. And we can talk about the rest a little bit later, but that's also what attracted me to your company as well. Just spreadsheets in general, like really resonate with me. And recently, I'll tell you a funny story and we can move on. But my wife was like, "So when are you going to retire and join me in the garden?" And I said, "Are there spreadsheets in the garden?"
So did you know how to code at that point from college or not particularly?
So when I was in college, I'd taken some courses like Turbo Pascal. That sort of tells you how old I am. Turbo
Right. Yeah.
Pascal, like basic, but I was a history major. So I would get these thick books from Barnes and Noble that are like Excel books and Excel macro books. And I would pour through those, reading them from front to back. And that's how I would learn. That was my Stack Overflow.
So you got into spreadsheets and started playing with Excel a lot. What got you into starting the company that became Google Sheet? Is there something that I guess my question is, how did you think it belonged to the web? Because it was actually not obvious at all back then. Microsoft was not putting Excel on the web in those early years.
Yeah, it's interesting. After Subway, I was working in banking. And basically, I was a developer. I'd figured out a way to like through my own teaching my own, I'd become very good with Excel and Excel VBA. So the banks, I was valuable to the banks because all the banks at the time were keeping a lot of their models in spreadsheets, and they still do. So I would go in there and the bankers would ask me, "Hey, I have this very complex model, a spreadsheet that is a commercial mortgage-backed security or something like that. Can you convert this to a web application, rewrite it in C++, and put a web front end to it so that our users can use it? I don't want to share the spreadsheet with them, but I want them to be able to go in there and, for example, change a rate and see what the tranches would look like and what the rest of it would look like." And I thought to myself, this is crazy. Why would I want to rewrite it? Why don't I write a program that actually looks at the spreadsheet? Maybe I give a simple UI as well, where they could say, these are the screens that we want to see on the web. And I'll basically replicate the calculation engine of Excel and, put the thing on the web with a push of a button. Sounded crazy. I did a prototype first where it didn't even have a UI on the web, but it could actually, read the spreadsheet and like I could see in the terminal that it was calculating properly. And I basically approached my boss at, I believe it was JP Morgan, and I said, "This is something that I want to do." It was the dot-com boom that was happening. And I basically said, "Hey, I want to work on this, and I either do it here or I leave." And because it was like all these companies were trying to keep their folks, they agreed to basically co-license this technology. So I was building it within JP Morgan. And then the dot-com bust happened and they said, "You got to choose." And I decided to start my company. And actually my boss joined me in the company. My boss is Jonathan Rochelle.
Okay. Oh yeah.
He's my PM partner, and he's just amazing. And basically we built what it was called Excel to Web. We weren't very good with names, but we built that together essentially, along with Michael Lamonic, who's still at Google, and he's like the brains behind all of this.
So it was acquired by Google eventually, and
It was eventually acquired by Google, yes.
How many years did you do that on your own before? being
I would say
acquired?
so. There were two iterations I went through. First, I had Excel to J, which was going to Java. And then that was when I learned how to do Java, and I was really doing it poorly. And then we had Excel to Web, and Excel to Web is the one that actually took off. And so I would say around 4 to 5 years. The second iteration, we were actually doing well. We never raised funds. So I was basically like part-time consulting. Jonathan had his consulting service as well, and we worked through that as well. So it was sort of self-funded. We were selling licenses for like Deutsche Bank. We were all excited. We sell a license to Deutsche Bank for 6 figures. And so it took they could take their spreadsheets and convert them into web apps. But it was like the sales cycle was so long, and we had contacts at Google that we started talking to. And I remember this guy, Adam Bosworth, who's the father of XML. He was sort of like the person that saw what we had. And at the same time, he had just launched Gmail. He had envisioned building this suite of apps within Google. And we demoed basically our product. And I built a prototype that took our engine and essentially provided you with a spreadsheet on the web. It was very clunky, but he started playing around with it. And when we met with him, I said, you know what, we'd like to acquire you. And so it was about 4 or 5 years.
When did you start seeing like rapid adoption? I mean, now pretty much everybody uses Google Apps, but
Yeah. So, I mean, early days, the person who actually was finally responsible for us going in was my boss of 10 years, this guy, Alan Warren. And I remember he once told me the reason we acquired you was more to have something that changed the conversation about Bing encroaching on Google to the other way around, of Google basically encroaching on Office. But I had people internally at Google who were like, why do we buy you? Why are we doing spreadsheets? And that was, for a very long time, that was the case. In fact, I remember we worked on, I set the goal. There were like 4 of us working on it, essentially, or 5 of us on Google Spreadsheets. And I set the goal of launching the product externally within 6 months. We ended up launching it internally in 6 months and then externally in a year. And I remember the first time when we launched it internally, people were just playing tic-tac-toe on it. So the early versions were really not like that good at all. But, it was, I think when it really started taking off is Adam Bosworth was responsible for purchasing this company called Rightly that became Google Docs. And once we brought Docs and Sheets together, it started taking off. And then once we brought Gmail and Calendar and the suite together, that's where it became a thing. And I must say that early days, it was Gmail sort of pulling all the rest of us up. It wasn't
Mhm.
like, Docs carrying it. One significant event that I remember when Marissa Mayer went to Yahoo and became their CEO. She basically demanded that they need to use Google Docs. It was early, a few years after we launched. And that's when I knew, okay, we have something. That was sort of like the icing on the cake, knowing it's always validated by your customers, right? When customers
Yeah,
are willing to pay and are asking for it, if they're asking for it, that's when you have something.
right.
And from the early days, we were very focused on meeting the customer's needs.
Yeah. We'll go back to actually this bundling aspect of having different tools, because it's actually something that I want to discuss when it comes to your current experience with Notion. But before that, like trying to keep things, chronologically. So you were at Google for quite a few years, and then went to lead product engineering at Slack during COVID, right?
Correct.
Which is arguably one of the most critical moments for like workplace communication, given what was going on and everybody working from home. And that's when we saw most tech businesses, but Slack in particular, having like incredible growth for in terms of users and usage and everything. Reflecting on the experience and knowing what we know today about like Teams and all the tools like that, do you think Slack reached its full potential? Might be a little bit controversial question, but curious to hear your take on this.
So I personally think Slack is one of the better products that I've used. If I had a startup, I would want to be basically using Slack and Notion. That's what I live in for the most part. But I do think that Slack, as an independent company, I think Stuart, the CEO, and Cal, CTO, I still think Cal is the best CTO I've worked with. And the two of them were just a force. And I do think that when they were operating independently, it was just like they could move faster. I mean, even if you look at Google, Google's so large, early days of Google, we were able to move very fast within Google as Google Sheets. And there were a lot of different teams that were moving fast. But as Google grew, it was harder to move as fast because you got to coordinate with so many different teams. And I think that's what happened with Slack as well. Once it got acquired by Salesforce, by sheer virtue of being part of a larger company, it's hard to coordinate and move as fast. So the answer is, I mean, it's hard to say. Like, I think it's continued to do great things, but I do think that as an independent, smaller company like Bubble and Notion, you can move a lot faster, make decisions faster, pivot faster, and that's just not possible as part of a larger company. And you could see that in Microsoft, you could see that at Google, you could see that at other places. But once these large companies galvanize everyone and get everyone together, you see it at Google right now, they can do amazing things.
So to my question, do you think Slack reached its full potential?
I don't think it did, but it's hard to say. I mean, I don't think it did because it is part of a larger company. That's the main thing.
And so let's talk about Microsoft here, for instance, with Teams, because they were able to catch up actually pretty quickly. Why do you think they were able to do that?
Once Microsoft or Google decides they want to go after something, I mean, they have all the resources. So Microsoft ended up saying, we want to they saw that if they didn't roll out Teams, it would basically, Slack would take over a lot of their accounts, and they decided we're going to roll out Teams. Even though Teams wasn't as good as Slack, it ended up slowing Slack down, which eventually I think it led to it being acquired as well, because Stuart and Cal understood that they needed to be part of a suite or larger suite in order to end up making more and more revenue. And by the way, revenue-wise, I don't know Slack's revenue, but I do think that it's benefited from Salesforce. I'm talking about the product itself. I don't think it reached the potential because again, being part of a larger company, there's so much more coordination that goes on. By the way, the same thing happened with Google, right? When Google launched Google Docs, Microsoft came out with, hey, we have collaboration as well. Even though it wasn't as good as Google's, it ended up sort of slowing Google down. In fact, I think they bought docs.google.com. And I remember Jonathan being like, oh my God, why didn't we buy that? I really wanted to buy docs.google.com.
What would be the one key learning from your experience at Slack?
Key learnings, it just reaffirmation from Slack is being very user focused and capturing metrics. You can have intuition, but you can't just go by intuition. And I saw this a lot at Slack where we operated based on intuition more than what the users were saying. And sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. I'm a big believer that you can go by intuition, but you got to validate it through dogfooding internally and then validate it externally. And it's really important that you go through these stages and test your intuition because you're not always right. And one of the things that I appreciated about Google's very strategic and good about if a product didn't do well, they actually basically stopped it and deprecated it. And I thought that was a good thing. I don't see enough companies doing that necessarily. And I think Google's to the other extreme where they go so much by, numbers and everything is sort of analytics and data informing how you actually build the product. Whereas I think Slack was on the other hand, where it was very much everything was driven sort of by intuition. I think Notion sort of has it right where we try to do both, where it's craft and intuition is important, but we also try to validate it with numbers.
So let's jump to Notion actually. So when did you join Notion as CTO?
I joined Notion a little over 2 years ago. I was actually not looking to leave Slack. I really love working there, but I had a relative at Notion who reached out to me and said, the CEO wants to talk to you. And I wanted to do him a favor. And next thing I know, I was like, you know what? I want to do another startup and be part of another startup.
Very impressive company and very impressive product, and yet in a very competitive space and competing with Google and Microsoft, right? Both best productivity tool suites in the world, or the most established one, not necessarily the best ones, but the most established one. Why is Notion doing so well?
You mentioned very impressive tech, and it's also very impressive people. And that's one of the reasons I came. Ivan, I watched videos of Ivan, Akshay, and them. So the answer to your question is, I do think the C-suite gets along really well and the people are really collaborative. So the people actually makes it really special. But it also goes back to what I said before. Notion is, by virtue of being smaller, we can move a lot faster because the C-suite gets along. They're very much aligned and they can pivot very fast. And I'll give you an example. Like one of the main reasons I joined is because I felt like Notion was on the cutting edge when it came to AI. As soon as ChatGPT came out, Notion in the February, 2 months later, was out with Notion AI. And you want to be part of a company like that where it's constantly the founders, Simon Last and Ivan Zhao, are always sort of thinking, how do we stay ahead? How do we stay on the cutting edge of technology? And I wanted to be part of a company like that. So it comes back to, you want to sort of find people who are on the cutting edge and are willing to make those hard decisions and pivot.
And what's making the team so special? Is it the hiring process? Is there
I
something
think
that
there's,
Notion does particularly well?
yeah, I actually think one of the things I noticed during the interview process is that they go through a thorough background check, reference check for every single individual. And I felt that was really important. And Ivan was very much involved and still is in looking to make sure that like we are hiring the right people. There's a, until I joined, he was like really doing all the craft and value interviews. I don't know how he has time because the guy never sleeps, but he's very much involved in the interview process and wants to hire people who sort of fit in well, not just tech wise, but collaboratively and like culture wise within Notion as well. And yeah, I do think it comes down from the founders. Most people I talked to, I had one person who was considering leaving Notion, and when they came down to making the decision, they were like, well, which CEO would I prefer to work with, Ivan or this other CEO? And they were like, it's a clear, choice. They want to work with Ivan. And recently we had a alumni day in San Francisco, and there were a lot of alumni that showed, and like a whole bunch of them, like 50, were saying how much they miss Notion.
So talk about the bundling, like you mentioned that Google, Gmail was the one driving. So we started seeing Notion expand a little bit, right? With,
Yes.
email, calendar, these different tools. What's the strategy here? Like, how do you think about like bundling? Usually, like what people tend to say that you should do one thing and focus on it and do it extremely well. And to some extent, what's happening with Notion seems a little bit different from that. What's the plan here?
Microsoft Office became what it is today, mainly from bundling. They ended up like all the different Excel and Word and everything that they have. Some of them were acquired. They brought it in and they bundled it together. That was really what was the success for them. And many of the listeners don't remember Lotus 1-2-3.
I do.
Lotus 1-2-3 was like, I was an expert on that. So like, it was the bundling that really did it. And for Google, I would say the same thing. I mentioned it earlier. I think the fact that we were able to, I think the project was called Dasher, I believe, where we brought all the disparate products of like the productivity tools together, Gmail, calendar, and bundled them together. And then layering on top of that, the whole, off model. I think that's what did it. It makes it a lot easier for a company to come in, and it makes it a lot harder to move off of Google once you've come in, because you get so many different things. As long as one or two of those things are really useful to you, you're not going to move off. Having said that, there are opportunities for like different products like Zoom and others, or Slack, that specialize to come in and be an additional. But I think at its core, when you bundle, you sort of become indispensable, and you create defenses for yourself. So that was a strategy for Notion as well, and Slack before that as well. If you many people may not realize, but Slack, that you have huddles and you have Canvas and things. So it was sort of like, how do we offer? It's not even bundling. It's how do we offer other products that make people want to use Slack more and better. Notion, same thing. When we introduced Calendar, that was before me, but the idea was, how do we basically offer more to our users? And the way I think of it is, how do we save our users time so that they can get their work done faster? The bundling aspect is, to me, there's a cost aspect, but there's also, how do you make it easier for you to like get your work done? Having mail and calendar in one place where I can like get my work done and I'm not context switching as much is a great time saver. So from that standpoint, it's really worked. The issue is that with AI, the advances in AI and like with all the different agents that are running, I'm not sure if UI is as important anymore. There's so much that you can do with mail and calendar and like all the productivity apps that you have where you don't need to even touch the UI. So I think in the future, it's less clear to me how the bundling makes as much sense because you could literally through MCP servers and others connect with all these other apps and like be able to get your work done and bring in the parts of mail and calendar that you really care about. And every now and then you'll go to the mail app or the calendar app, but like you're not necessarily 90% of the time, you're basically living in Notion or other products.
Interesting. One other question I have about the Notion, it's something a little bit similar to Bubble. Like Bubble has a very loyal community. Our users, identify themselves as Bubblers. And Notion has something similar. And I haven't seen many productivity tools that do have this kind of community around the product. How do you explain that? Because for something like Bubble, it makes sense. Usually people need to help each other. It's a programming tool. So sometimes, developers, they're not sure how to build something. You have multiple ways to do it. So you're going to ask some help from some people. For Notion, it doesn't sound that it's that reason, but may be mistaken. Why do people identify as a Notion community?
Yeah, it is incredible. I have to say that's one of the other reasons I joined Notion is I was reading about it and watching videos and saw what a large community it had. We certainly, I don't remember having this at Google, for example, for any of our products. I mean, I was very proud of everything that we did at Google. And even at Slack, it wasn't, I mean, there wasn't a community that I
Right.
remember.
Right.
Whereas with Notion, the last 2 years, I've gotten a chance to fly out to Seoul and Tokyo for Make with Notion and do the keynote there. And it's amazing. People come up and they're taking pictures and they like love Notion. I think part of it is, Ivan and our marketing's genius with the way they have the Notion avatars, and it's fun. The way even your documents, the way you can just add an icon or change the background, it makes Notion fun, and I think that appeals to this community. I also was when I was walking in Japan in Tokyo, I noticed how like Tokyo's so neat and so clean. There's not garbage anywhere. Everything underneath is connected. And I talked about the keynote, how I think that's one of the reasons we're so popular in Tokyo is because Notion is very clean, fun, and everything is sort of connected. In Tokyo, you could walk underneath from building to building for like miles, essentially. And
Yeah.
I felt like the thing that everything is structured as well, it sort of lended people to like get attracted to Notion as well. It brings that fun, structured, and connected aspect to the Japanese and South Koreans as well.
Now, one of the things with having a community is that users tend to be very vocal about what they want, right? And so one
Yes.
of the things that we have to deal with at Bubble, which can be challenging at times, is that advanced power users have some requests that are going to be pretty different from the newcomers that are not as vocal, but we also care about them because we want to have more users, of course, on the platform. Is that something you're facing as well at Notion? And do you have some thinking about how to balance the different asks here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's balance. I think we sort of strayed a little bit last year. And in fact, I got on with what we call our ambassadors, who are, the biggest promoters of our product. We got on a Zoom call with them and we I did a mea culpa on like how they were complaining that we had actually not focused on performance and bugs as much. And what we ended up doing internally is actually creating dashboards that we look at weekly where it looks at, ambassador and enterprise bugs and like high priority bugs essentially, on a regular basis to make sure that those are not, we have a 2-week SLA to make sure those get done. And we prioritize, for example, offline, which was one of the things that a lot of our customers were asking for. when we did the prior year, when we did Make with Notion, a lot of people were like, you're doing all this AI stuff. Can you focus on like, performance? And we're focused very much on making sure that the app is performant, constantly monitoring it. And my hope is that these things will actually show with customers, but it's hard because there's so many factors and variables in play, whether it's like their connection or what computer they're using. So it's hard, but we're definitely focused on those things. And I think those are the things that I've heard from our community and ambassadors a lot. And I would say oftentimes, yes, they're asking for things that are different than our consumers, but we try to find as much overlap and focus on those things.
Let's jump into AI for a little bit, especially the app building landscape. So that what Bubble is in, but vibe coding tools are also in this. How do you see the space evolving right now? What's your honest read on the vibe coding and no code combined actually landscape? What's working, what's not? How do you feel about vibe coding as a way to build?
So first of all, let me just say that I am not an expert in this area at all, but and I also don't necessarily like the term vibe coding, in that I think it's sort of, let's put it this way, as AI improves, it becomes more than vibe coding. It's actually writing good code. Technology is changing so fast, and I'm just blown away by what the agents can do. I sort of tend to be on this part of it. I tend to be a little bit late to the game. I'm of the belief that you're going to need really good engineers that understand the code and can like review the code in between. It's very interesting where we're going. I mean, I was listening to some of the talks from Davos, and like, I think one of the CEOs was saying how in a year.
Yeah, Dario was saying that. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I buy that. I mean, he would say that because his company is selling, and by the way, great product, but like,
Yep.
And I love using it, but like the point is, I don't think we're going to get there in a year. I certainly feel like you're still going to need good engineers that can manage these agents and make sure that they're producing the right results. The agents are only as good as the prompt that you give them. Like if you don't give them the good prompt, it's not going to produce the right result. If you're building a new product that is completely new and it's very different than anything that's out there, I think you're still going to need good engineers that can leverage the right prompts.
Yeah, I mean, at Bubble, we tend to see it that way. I mean, the reason we think a visual abstraction matters is because with vibe coding, you have to be a code expert to, as you're saying, to be able to ensure the quality is there. Well, our bet is that if we combine that with a visual interface, then you also need to be a Bubble expert to manage the Bubble agent, but it's easier to be a Bubble expert because it's a high level of abstraction and therefore easier to learn. One critique that we have with AI vibe coding in particular is that when something breaks, you get into some, an infinite loop where one prompt you have one prompt to fix something and it creates another bug, and then it's never ending. Do you see that going away at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are the types of things that I think will be fixed. I mean, seeing the progression in just a year of how things have improved, I would think that will be fixed. But like the key is that I'm not sure if the agent will come up with the optimal solution. For example, I was working on a small feature just to test one of the agents, and like it actually built the feature and it worked on one try, but it wasn't the right implementation. And the same thing, I asked it to fix a bug and it fixed the bug, but it wasn't the right implementation. So I do think the looping thing that you're talking about, I think that'll be solved, but I'm not sure that it will necessarily have the right implementation without the right prompts.
One post that you wrote recently on Notion's blog was about the fact that you came into Notion without considering yourself as an AI expert. Like you're not an AI researcher. How does that impact you in your position where you have to think about AI all the time, both in terms of how the engineering team builds a product, but also Notion AI, which is a product on its own?
Yeah.
How have you learned? What are the advantages of not being an expert? Like, how do you see yourself in this capacity?
I mean, number one, I think it's important to acknowledge that and not pretend you're something you're not. And I've always been very open about like, when I'm not an expert in something, which is in most things, I'll say I'm not an expert. But the thing that I've been very lucky and fortunate about and good about is surrounding myself with experts. And the founders, especially like if you look at Simon Last, who technically is the real CTO of Notion, he spends all his time on AI and forward-looking stuff and like all his time thinking about this. So I don't need to necessarily be the expert as long as I have someone like him and others at Notion who are really well versed on AI and on the cutting edge. And as long as I'm like basically, you know, listening to them, I think I'm able to navigate basically and make sure that Notion is on the cutting edge. As at least I'm not getting in the way. And if anything, I'm like trying all the different tools. They're pushing me to become more well versed in AI and like use the agents, use all the new AI tools in order to develop and work on Notion. So I'm becoming better. I'm like lagging behind them, but they're on the cutting edge, and collaboratively we're able to like get Notion to a better place.
So we're almost at the end here. Let's talk a little bit about advice for builders. I mean, how people listening to this podcast are building products and companies. I guess just starting, like, do you have one advice that comes to mind if someone is thinking about building a product today?
I can't say that I would have one advice, but I would say building something as fast as possible, prototyping it, and like getting it out to so that you can use it yourself and people around you can use, I think is critical. The faster you could get something out there to validate your assumption, the better it is. And I think that's where product like Bubble comes in. If I could basically cut the time of prototype and build something that could then mature into a real product as well, I'll take that anytime. And looking back on my own experience with building what became Google Sheets, I wish I had the products today that you all have access to, like Bubble, where I could build something and in fact build a mobile app as well. That blows my mind that you can actually do that as well through vibe coding. So my advice would be build for the user, which means build it for yourself and the people you're testing with as fast as possible so that you can validate what you're building works.
And I guess the other question is, what's a mistake except being too slow? Because that's a natural mistake here. Is there one mistake that you think is really killing early products and early ventures?
I was reading an article yesterday, I think, about how Ramp, for example, wasn't the first to the market, but like second to the market. And YouTube wasn't the first to the market. It's just you need to constantly, once you have product market fit and you have the users, you need to keep setting higher and higher expectation, continue improving your product. And if you rest on your laurels, someone else will come in with the same product, just slightly better, and like take over. And Ramp did that, YouTube did that. In fact, there was a Google video before that didn't go anywhere. And that's why Google bought YouTube.
Well, thank you so much, Fuzzy, for being with us today. I mean, I'm sure like people listening will have a great insight of this conversation. So thank you, and very much looking forward to what you're doing next with Notion and beyond.
Thank you. And I look forward to see what you do with Bubble. Bye.
A massive thanks to Fuzzy for joining us on our second episode of the New Build podcast. You can find relevant links to all of the tools they discussed in the show notes of this episode. Before we leave, a few quick housekeeping announcements. First, if you want to turn your app idea into a real business with paying customers, it is definitely not too late to join our 3-month launch program, From Prototype to Profit, which is running through March. This is an active cohort that you can join today. You will get access to a dedicated Slack community, live office hours with Bubble experts every Friday, and priority consideration for our launch lab, which is where our marketing team becomes your marketing team, producing videos, imagery, and more to help you market and launch your business. So, if that sounds of interest to you, the program officially started last week, but you can still join and start building now. And if you're building a web app, you can get a leg up with the help of the Bubble AI agent, which can not only answer questions about how to build what you want to build, it can also directly design UI, modify your database, and even add logic to your app right there in the editor. To join our current cohort, check the link in our show notes or visit prototype-to-profit.bubbleapps.io. That's prototype-to-profit.bubbleapps.io. Second announcement. After hearing his interview with Fuzzy, if you want to hear more from our co-founder Emmanuel, or better yet, ask him a question directly about his take on AI and vibe coding, or his experience scaling Bubble, what's next for the product, or anything else that you may want to ask a tech founder, his next monthly AMA will be happening Thursday, February 12th at noon Eastern Time on our YouTube channel. Recordings of his AMAs are always available on YouTube right after they happen. Last, a very exciting product announcement. There are already hundreds of mobile apps built with Bubble that have launched to the app stores. If you have one, or are planning to launch one as a business, open beta for in-app purchases on native mobile launches very soon. In fact, tomorrow. This episode comes out Tuesday, February 3rd. Starting Wednesday, February 4th, you will now be able to accept subscription payments within your native mobile app, and you will be able to set that up directly from the Bubble editor. There will be some tutorial resources and documentation on exactly how to do that, so stay tuned for that. That's it for announcements. Don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving us a review. Those reviews will really help others to find the show. Last, at the end of every episode, we do a quick segment called Bubble Tip of the Week. Today's tip comes from me, actually. You can color code anything in your database by adding a text field and storing hex code values. So if you're building an app and are displaying info on different groups or teams or categories, or maybe you have something like dynamic tags and you want to give those elements their own visual identity dynamically, most color inputs for any element will also accept dynamic data and can pull that hex code value field from any data source. A pro tip: you can always do more than one text field. So theoretically, you could establish your own dynamic color palettes for individual objects in your database. And of course, this works for option sets too. As always, if anyone listening has a tip that they'd like to submit, please feel free to do so either by leaving us a comment or by leaving your top builder's tip, trick, or shortcut in a review of this podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.